Hey gang, this week's episode is brought to you by our friends at Mack Weldon, the premium men's essentials brand that believes in smart design and premium fabrics. Their design, Mack Weldon, is to be the most comfortable underwear or socks or shirts or hoodies or undershirts or sweatpants, you get the idea, and more that you'll ever wear. And our listeners this week, of course, can get 20% off their first order by visiting MackWeldon.com and entering the promo code GOODSEATS. Yes, 20% off your first order at MackWeldon.com. Enter that promo code GOODSEATS. Here's our show.
Tonight, for television's biggest sports jackpot, $25,000. From the Hollywood Legion lanes, Ken Baylor meets Jim St. John. The winner to challenge, last week's $75,000 winner, the King of the Hill, Therm Gibson. You'll also be seeing three of America's brightest young stars roll a ball for their favorite charity. It's Jackpot Bowling, starring Milton Berle, and brought to you by Miracle Mild of Phillies, the best-selling cigars in the USA. Featuring Phillies Perfecto. Extra size, rich taste Phillies Perfecto. And by Brunswick, the #1 name in bowling. Now, here he is, your host, Milton Berle.
Thank you. Woo! Thank you. No, don't stop applauding. Come on, keep it up, keep it up. Keep it up. That's it. That's it. Thank you. Thank you. All that applause, ladies and gentlemen, will be donated to any young man who could use it. Well, come into it. How about what happened on this show last week? Therm Gibson winning $75,000. How about that? Isn't that wonderful? I'm telling you. Believe me, you have no idea how thrilling it was. Right after he hit the jackpot, the sponsor ran over to Gibson, put out his hand, and hit him right in the mouth.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
Well, hey now there, everybody. How are you? It's Tim Hanlon, and it's Good Seats Still Available, our curious little podcast, our little exploration each and every week into what used to be in professional sports. And we strive for the enigmatic on this little show. And I think we have outdone ourselves this week. And I urge you to listen carefully and learn and enjoy with me in our little exploration this week into the world of bowling. Yes, I said the world of bowling. And our journey into the ill-fated, very short-lived, but very fascinating and intriguing story of the National Bowling League. Yes, the National Bowling League. There was such a thing in 1961 where, as you heard in that little setup there, bowling on television was all the rage. It was all over television. And frankly, if you're a historian of television and media in this country, back from the earliest days of when television was starting to truly get commercialized in the late 1940s, early 1950s, bowling, along with professional wrestling, were probably the two biggest mainstays, I guess, of early television programming on your black and white set as it got bigger and bigger over the years. Bowling was fascinatingly easy sport to televise. It was quite the sport of the everyman. It was certainly something that everybody felt that they could do and relate to. And the fledgling television networks, and there were only 2 or 3 of them at the time, you young whippersnappers, again, you want to search up the Wikipedia and sort of learn what television was like before streaming and all that kind of stuff sort of came about. But bowling was very much something very central in a lot of programming on these TV networks and even local TV stations, too. That little clip that you heard at the beginning was a nice piece of evidence circa 1961, January 9th, 1961, to be exact, on the NBC television network at 10:30 Eastern Time. Yeah, that was Chick Hearn, the soon-to-be Los Angeles Lakers and other sports legend in Los Angeles with, of course, Milton Berle, whose career arguably was beginning to wane. And, this was actually a show that NBC shuttled Burl onto as they were trying to burn off, frankly, credits from their, I think it was a 30-year-long, somewhat lifetime type contract that they had with Burl. They wanted to kind of, use them up. An interesting pairing there. Milton Berle doing some shtick. Professional bowlers. These are real pros. The beginnings of what we'll talk about in our conversation this week with our guest, our very special guest, Dr. Jake Schmidt. He's the sort of dean, I think, of bowling historians out there. He's truly an historian with a PhD from the fine institution known as the University of Chicago, where yours truly got his MBA, but I digress. Milton Berle, back to our little story here, did a little shtick there and basically hosted this weekly show where the top bowlers in and around this thing called the Pro Bowlers Association kind of battled it out on live television for some gigantic purses. And there were a number of these sort of shows, prime time and on weekends as well. We'll get into sort of what transpired in 1961, because not only were shows like this on the air on national television in prime time, but you also had the beginnings of what we now know today as the Pro Bowlers Tour and the Pro Bowlers Association and its ultimate, I guess, decision by 1962 or so to kind of solidify that as the premier way to have pro bowlers featured and feted and on television. But it is against this backdrop where our little story kind of begins in 1961. And it starts a little bit earlier than that. We hint at that with Dr. Jake in a few minutes. When the Pro Bowlers Tour was not necessarily guaranteed to be the format. No, there were a bunch of people in pro bowling circles that envisioned a true team league, with cities competing with each other, as frankly most bowling competitions at that time and even today are kind of constructed. There's teams playing each other, not individuals, which is what the tour sort of model is. But that's what we're going to get into today with this thing called the National Bowling League with our guest, Dr. Jake Schmidt. And I think you're going to find it really intriguing. This is a fascinating topic to me. I bowl just about as much as any other average person out there in the world. But, to know that there was actually a league that almost became, frankly, the manner by which pro bowling and the television presentation of such would have, come into modern day. But no, the tour is what ultimately became sort of the format. But we delve very deeply into this asterisk known as the National Bowling League. And you'll see the reasons why it was appealing to people, why it ultimately didn't work, and the role of television and all that kind of stuff, and lots more. If you're not even if bowling interests you at all, it doesn't matter. You're going to find this show to be fascinating. And again, our conversation with Dr. Jake Schmidt, coming up in just a couple of moments. I virtually guarantee that you will find this to be fascinating as I did. Before we get there, though, I want to say hello and welcome to our friends at Hellofresh. Yes, Hellofresh, it's America's #1 meal kit where you can get easy seasonal recipes and pre-measured ingredients delivered right to your door. And all you have to do, of course, is just cook and enjoy. And we've tried the Hellofresh service and the meals at the Hanlon household, and I will tell you, they have gone over tremendously well, and we cannot wait to get our next shipment after the Thanksgiving holiday, of course. And what is HelloFresh? Well, look, it's home-cooked meals made simple. They make cooking delicious meals at home a reality, regardless of the comfort level that you have in the kitchen. From step-by-step recipes to pre-measured ingredients, you'll have everything you need to get a wow-worthy dinner on the table in just about 30 minutes or so. So you can say goodbye to endless grocery store trips and takeout food. HelloFresh has you covered. It's delicious as well. Break out of the dinner rut with HelloFresh's 20-plus seasonal chef-curated recipes each week. There's something for everyone, from family recipes to calorie smart and vegetarian and fun menu series like the Hall of Fame or their Craft Burger series. HelloFresh has more 5-star recipes than any other meal kit, so you'll know you'll always get something delicious. And of course, HelloFresh is flexible to fit your lifestyle. You can add extra meals to your weekly order or even yummy add-ons like garlic bread or cookie dough. So easily it is for you to exchange your delivery dates. You can easily change or update your food preferences. Hell, you can even skip a week or two as you might need based on your travel plans. So by all means, give it a try. It's Hellofresh, and of course, we've got you covered on the discount front. You're going to get 9 free meals. Our listeners get 9 free meals when you go to hellofresh.com/goodseats9 and use the promo code GoodSeats9. You got it. It's 9 free meals. Hard to believe, but it's absolutely true, and it's absolutely delicious and well worth the try. Give it a try. Why don't you? HelloFresh.com/GoodSeats9, the number 9, and use the promo code GoodSeats9. Of course, the same number 9. And one more time, that's HelloFresh.com/GoodSeats9 and enter the promo code GoodSeats9. It's an awesome offer. Give it a try. You will love it. And we appreciate your doing so. And when you do so, yes, you give us a little love for the show too, and that keeps our lights on. And we appreciate that tremendously. So why not eat your way to supporting the show? Why don't you? And why don't you grab one of your snacks there and sit back and kick back and enjoy our fascinating discussion about the National Bowling League. Here it is. Here's our conversation with the great Dr. Jake coming up. Let's start from the start, right? So give our audience some background as to who you are and what your, shall we say, day job is. And then how do we get into this, I think, frankly, world-class knowledge around the sport of bowling?
Well, first of all, my name is John R. Schmidt, but in bowling circles, they call me J.R. Schmidt or Jake Schmidt. I am a fifth-generation Chicagoan. I've went to graduate school. I went to Loyola University here for my bachelor's and master's, PhD from the University of Chicago in history. I taught at various places, everything from kindergarten through college, mostly through the Chicago public school system. And I retired from that in 1987. And along the way, I became a bowler as a kid. I was a good bowler, but not a great bowler. And I managed to make a decent amount of money bowling, but fortunately I did not go up against too many people that were better than me. So that's how I worked my way through college. And I was able to pay for my college through bowling, and I've continued bowling. Continue bowling in a league now for seniors, go to the national tournament every year. I've done 52 of those. And since 1990, I've been writing for Bowlers Journal International. And I do the historical column for them. Besides that, I write books on Chicago history. I wrote for the Tribune for a while, for WBEZ. My latest project is I have a book out called Hidden Chicago Landmarks, and I'm on WGN Radio once a month talking about some of the hidden landmarks in Chicago. But the bowling book I have, which is a collection of my bowling stories, is called the Bowling Chronicles, and there are 90 of my stories from Bowlers Journal in there, including the story in the National Bowling League. So I'm always happy to talk about the National Bowling League because people can't imagine why there would be a National Bowling League. I mean, the whole idea sounds outlandish today because what the National Bowling League was, it was an inner-city league of 5-man teams, and it was based on the model of Major League Baseball, and they played in purpose-built stadiums, and they were on a 6-month-long schedule. Well, it seems ludicrous today when you think of something like that. Bowling, competitive bowling, has not been doing well, but this is like 1961, and in 1961, bowling was booming. For the past 5 years before that, the number of bowling centers had grown 25% in Brunswick and Amherst with hot stocks in the New York Exchange, and every banquet, athletic banquet, you always had a bowler there. And there were 2 statistics that I like to cite to show how popular bowling was. In 1961, out of an adult population of 110 million Americans, 6.5 million bowled in sanctioned leagues. That's 1 out of every 17 men and women. And also in 1961, a bowler named Thurm Gibson won $76,000 rolling 6 straight strikes on the Jackpot Bowling TV show. And he made more money in 4 minutes than Mickey Mantle earned playing an entire season in the Yankee outfield. So in 1961, the idea of a National Bowling League was not so outlandish at all.
So let's back up for a second. So you're a historian by profession. So this actually makes you doubly and triply qualified and interesting for this conversation, right?
Plus, I lived through it as a kid.
There you go. But second, I think you bring up some important points here, right? Where you got to sort of put all of this in context because, and maybe you can go a little bit into a little bit more detail here about, say, the 1950s or so. This is not just a recreational sport, right? Obviously set against the booming time relative to the war years prior, right, in the 1950s, but also television, right? I mean, Jackpot Bowling was a kind of a manufactured for television in its earliest days, really, event, right?
Bowling was perfect for TV, just like wrestling was, because it had a small arena that could focus on. You could do it with one camera, basically, and it was easy to understand. And these bowling shows, every major bowling city had a local show, and then they had syndicated series like Championship Bowling. Later on, you had Jackpot Bowling, which was this, which I mentioned, which was a network show. And actually, the idea for a National Bowling League might have come from one of these shows called Bowling Time, which was in 1956. And their hook was they got 8 bowlers on, and they called themselves the National League of Bowling. And it was basically a TV show. The 8 bowlers represented 8 different cities. They had a guy from New York, a guy from Chicago, Detroit, L.A., and so on. And they just bowled matches with each other, and one guy won. And then the next year, they had another TV show, and they called it the American League of Bowling. And they had, again, guys from different cities, and they bowled each other, and that was the TV show. And along the way, this guy, Leonard Homel, who was a proprietor out in Los Angeles, got the idea, well, why don't we have a full-fledged 5-man bowling league, 5-man team bowling league, just like the major leagues. There's everybody loves bowling. Bowling's booming. So why don't we do this? And he was really the guy that was behind this. They really got it started, Leonard Homel.
Well, before we get into Leonard's sort of story and sort of the origination of this, it's also, you're mentioning television, it's certainly accessible, right, to the average American, right?
Oh, sure, because you watch bowling on TV, and you roll the ball down. I mean, there's a science behind it, like anything else, but it's basically you roll the ball down, you knock the pins over, or you don't knock the pins over. Is basically what it is.
Yeah, I can do that. Right?
Yeah, anybody can go out and bowl, and you can get lucky. You can throw the ball, and and even the arenas you can go to, like Fates Neeson was a bowling alley in Chicago, on the north side of Chicago, and they had 8 lanes, and they had a famous TV show there. And people used to come in just to bowl open play there. I mean, you're a golfer, you're probably not going to shoot at Augusta. You're not going to shoot hoops at Boston Garden. You're not going to play the outfield in Yankee Stadium. But, hey, you can go up to Fates Neeson in Chicago, and you can bowl in the same alleys that Don Carter was bowling on, or Joe Kristoff, or Joe Wilman, or any of these guys. So it appealed to people because it was an accessible sport.
So given that then, and given its, you mentioned wrestling, right? Obviously that's probably one of the first sports that sort of truly took to television in its, even if it's in its infancy, even, late 40s when it was just still somewhat experimental, right? Bowling was probably almost on par, if you will, with that in terms of the ease of televising as well as maybe beyond, say, wrestling, accessible in terms of its, hey, even I can do that, and literally I can do it literally down the street or down the block.
Oh, sure. And again, the early days of television, they would put the TV sub. Most of the early TV sets were in bars, and it were mostly guys who were watching it in bars. And the TV sets were very small, and if they had a baseball game on, it was kind of hard to follow the action, particularly the TV sets up above the bar, high up. But you got a bowling match on, you can see what's going on very easily. So like in the early 50s and even getting in the late 50s, bowling was very accessible to people, particularly men.
Yeah, and that's sort of the baseline I want to establish here, because it's also it stands to reason, right, that as prize money starts to get sort of embedded into, say, some of these television showcases, so to speak, that the idea of professionalism, right, for bowlers who want to attempt a living at it for more, shall we say, bigger stakes and competitive prizes. The rumblings around how to do something around a professional version of bowling. And I think that's maybe sort of an interesting sort of thing to sort of put out there because this not only was this National Bowling League sort of gestating, but also this thing called the Pro Bowlers Association, which we know today. But it sounds to me like it was almost sort of a bit of a competition amongst the bowling intelligentsia.
Well, because beforehand, the people that earned money as bowlers, like for instance, a beer company would sponsor a bowling team in a city, and like Budweiser sponsored a team in St. Louis, and also Falstaff, and in Chicago you had, Meister Brown, whatever, Stroh's in Detroit, and the bowlers on the team would be paid a salary, and they'd go around and they'd appear in exhibitions and they'd promote the product. Okay, so those were the first people that were really kind of professional bowlers. But then in 1958, a guy by the name of Eddie Elias, who was a promoter in Akron, got an idea. Well, bowling is booming. Why don't we start a professional bowlers tour based on individual play, just like the golfers have, okay? And he was going to follow the model of the Professional Golfers Association. He managed to sign up some of these bowlers, and in 1959 they started a tournament. And they had a few tournaments here and there. And when the National Bowling League comes along in 1961, there's competition between this. Which one of these models is going to be the future of competitive bowling? Is it going to be team play the way it's always been? Or at the elite level, is it going to be individual play? And the question was, who was going to get the TV contract? Because that's where the money was going to be coming from.
So this almost seemed to be then sort of a battle for how to professionalize the sport, not if it was going to be have a pro level to it.
Oh, yeah, because you see, the thing is, when the National Bowling League already was starting, they naturally wanted to get the best named bowlers, like Don Carter and the guys with the Budweisers, Dick Weber, Billy Whaley, some of these other people were the best bowlers of the day. But those guys had guaranteed contracts, like, for instance, Carter bowled with the Budweiser's team. And he had a guaranteed contract from them for going around exhibitions, plus he represented Brunswick, the equipment manufacturer. He got money from them. So even though the National Bowling League was offering him money, he was kind of wary about it, and so were a lot of the other elite bowlers. As a matter of fact, one of the teams, they offered Carter something like, I think they were going to offer him $40,000 and a cut of the gate and a goat farm. I think it was the Dallas team was going to offer him, but he decided to stay with the Budweisers.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So it seems to me, and we'll get to that story in a second, because it's kind of wild and maybe almost emblematic of this ill-fated and short-lived NBL. But my sense is that I guess circa I don't know, maybe it's 1958, 59 or so is when, I think it was 1959 when the first handful of pro tours kind of went out there. And it also seems to me like it was hand in hand with television, which arguably, and then in retrospect, seems like it was a leg up, I guess, before this idea of an actual league kind of came about a couple of years later, and maybe almost kind of cemented it as doomed to failure, maybe, that maybe the tour was the way to go because TV and certainly sponsors were already, kind of circling around this is the approach, the tour approach.
Yeah, and the first PBA tournament was in '59, and it did 3 that year, and the next year they did a few more. But actually, the first tournaments, they would just have a bunch of guys would bowl, and they'd bowl 40 games or whatever it would be, and the guys that had the highest pin totals at the end, well, it was points actually, but the guys who had the highest total at the end would win. Well, after a while, when they got the TV contract, they had some experience in bowling where you would get to the TV broadcast and one fellow might be way ahead and there'd be no drama in the match on TV and people would kind of tune out. This happened in 1961, one of the 61 All-Star tournament, which when they went on TV, the guy he could have practically died on the approach. He was so far ahead he would have won the tournament. So when the Professional Bowlers Association comes along, they come up with a stepladder series on TV to make it more interesting. The night before, on Friday night, the top 5 bowlers, as it turns out, are seated in the TV show. and then the fifth place guy bowls the fourth place guy, and the winner of that bowls the third place guy, and then the winner of that bowls the second place guy, and then the winner of that bowls the guy who's the leader. So that way, it's in doubt until you get to the last match. And that made it much better for TV, and that was the format that's been used for pro bowling with, little tweaks for over 50 years now, almost 60 years.
From Northland Bowl in Jennings, Missouri, the PBA St. Louis Open. Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. This is Chris Schenkel here at the Northland Bowl in Jennings, Missouri, a northern suburb of the great city of St. Louis. Now, this is our 14th stop on the Professional Bowlers Association's exciting national tour, which features the world's greatest bowlers competing for over $500,000 in prize money. And every Saturday afternoon throughout the end of April, ABC, the #1 network for sports, will bring you the climactic semifinal and final rounds of these great PBA tournaments. And friends, don't forget, if a perfect 300 game is bowled, the ABC television network will give an additional $10,000. We'll be back with today's exciting tournament on Professional Bowlers Tour.
Well, okay, so 1959 then, it sounds to me like is somewhat of a pivotal year because you've got sort of the early inklings of a pro bowlers tour, whether it's, maybe with television sort of on the sidelines or potentially in the mix relatively quickly. But my understanding, and based on your writing, and by the way, all of the writings, and not only in book form, but the various articles and stuff, I am talking to the dean of this stuff. So I don't think there's anybody on the planet who knows more about sort of the history of bowling than Dr. Jake. So let me ask this question then. It feels to me, based on what I've read from your stuff, that 59 was also kind of the time when the early seeds of perhaps this thing called the National Bowling League kind of got started, even though the league itself really kind of didn't sort of launch until 1961. Is that right?
Yeah, Homel put an ad in the Wall Street Journal, I believe it was, and he said he was looking for investors in a new and exciting bowling promotion. And he had a 54-page prospectus, and he called a meeting of people, and they got together with the meeting. And after the meeting, after presented this, there was, people saying, oh, it's great, but they were kind of a little wary about putting down the money. But then in January of 1960, Bowler's Journal ran a long article on this. And once people in the bowling industry, they started to take this seriously. And that got the ball rolling, and after he would call another meeting in Chicago, and then he got a bunch of people together, and finally initial roster of cities, I think it was 7 investors put down money, and they put down $5,000 each for National Bowling League franchises. And so they were going to start off, they were going to have the people that put down the money were Chicago and L.A., Dallas, and Fort Worth separately, San Antonio and Omaha, and Raleigh, North Carolina. And Homel was elected the league president, so now they had to go start organizing. This was in February 1960, and they wanted to start in September of 61. So now they had to go out, convince more people to get in, sign bowlers, and so on.
So, I mean, this speaks to just the craze around bowling at this time. I mean, this was, it didn't seem outlandish, I guess. Maybe in retrospect, certainly it does, right? But the idea of, this is just another form factor, I guess, of how to professionalize or give another angle for folks aspiring to be professionals on a fairly regular basis to kind of play and compete against each other. It doesn't seem so crazy at all, given the television ratings and the popularity of the sport writ large in the United States at this time.
Oh, you talked to I talked to a guy named Tony Linderman, who was one of the early bowlers. He's passed away by now, but he was one of the bowlers in the National Bowling League. He was actually the captain of one of the teams. And he said there was nothing like it. He loved the National Bowling League. So did another guy I interviewed, Ed Lubansky. He was with the Detroit team. Loved the National Bowling League. Wish it could have made a go, but it didn't. We would treat it. He said even when the league, near the end of the season, when they were cutting back and they were scrimping and saving, just trying to get through the end of the season, they were still treated royally, they thought. And they just wished they could have continued this, but they couldn't do it. They did not get the TV contract, is what it turned out to be.
Okay, well, so let's talk about Leonard Homel then, and also this guy Dick Charles, right, who became the commissioner. Maybe the two stories of these guys maybe will help our audience better understand sort of maybe the formative months around getting some kind of structure around now that a number of folks are willing to pony up $5,000 for a franchise and kind of at least put some seed money into this.
Well, yeah, and the thing is, there was a lot of interest in this, a lot of enthusiasm that got the ball rolling. As I said, Dick Charles, he was an Omaha sportcaster, and they hired him as the league commissioner, so he was going to be going out and schmoozing with people, talking with people, trying to get them to sign up for this. And with all this publicity going on, the thing kind of snowballed. By July of 1960, like 3 or 4 months after they had this, February? I guess that'd be 5 months, whatever it is, after the first organizational meeting. Now the price of a franchise was up to $50,000. People wanted to sign up, put up $50,000. And now there were 12 franchises that had signed up. And they decided, well, now they were kind of getting publicity. They would decide to have a draft. Okay, this would be the great thing. They're going to show the public that they can attract bowlers. Okay, so the teams get together and they have a draft.
Before we get to the draft, though, I just got to ask you this quick question. I mean to interrupt, but it's because I want to get to who's putting the money up for these franchises? What is the source? Like, is there a prototypical owner type or any of these beer companies who seem to be very big part of the some of these tournaments and these and the pro association and that kind of stuff? Where is the money coming from? Who's ponying up the dough to own a franchise?
Well, one of the hunts was down in I believe it's Dallas. One of the Dallas Fort Worth. I can't remember, but one of the Hunt brothers put up the money for the local team over there.
Lamar Hunt,
Lamar Hunt,
a huge figure in Challenger leagues and stuff, and we'll talk.
American Football League. He was the money behind the American Football League at the time.
But he was probably more of an outlier, right? I mean, he had bigger fish to fry than a National Bowling League. No.
Well, his $50,000 and nothing to his pocket change. So
right. I'm just curious, just like where are these other sort of aspirants coming from? Like were there any kind of, are they prototypical, or was it just like huge bowling fans, or were they,
a lot of it was bowling fans and people who had some disposable income that wanted to invest in something. Like in San Antonio, they had a retired Air Force general was going to come up with the money for the franchise in San Antonio, and that they later had trouble because he didn't have the money, but. It was a lot of people that are involved in the bowling industry, either locally, either proprietors, or people who are just bowling fans that figured, hey, we'll take a gamble on this, and we'll put the money into this. So it was like in the different cities, was a lot of local proprietors. In Chicago, they had a man named Weber who was going to back the Chicago team, but he dropped out. He was the Chicago proprietor, so we wound up not having a team in Chicago. But again, a lot of the cases it was local proprietors or local people who were businessmen who liked bowling, or maybe even didn't like bowling but thought there was a way to make money.
Interesting. Okay, so the seed money was there, right? And so this draft, right? So you're I didn't mean to interrupt, but this draft is kind of almost seems like it's not only a way to stock this league with quality players, but also as a PR kind of event to kind of get people interested. And the fact that they can hopefully attract some of the major bowlers of the time.
Oh yeah, actually, there's a picture on this of in one of the bowling magazines of Lyndon Johnson, who was this would be 1961. He was this was still 1960. He was still a U.S. senator, and he was going to be running with Kennedy for president. I guess he was by this time. Kennedy might have been Kennedy's running mate, but anyway, he was there at the NBL draft, and he drew one of the numbers out.
And you're kidding?
No, really. Lyndon Johnson was at one of these meetings, and he drew one of the numbers out for something. I can't remember the details. I wish I could, but I do remember the picture of him after this meeting. What else you got to do when you're vice president, right? Or even a vice presidential candidate? But you have to check me on that one. That might be a fuzzy memory. But what I do remember, though, is that they were trying to get publicity for this draft, so they had 12 teams signed up, so they started drafting, and they took turns, and they would pick different people, and of course, then they had assigned to people, and it got to the point where anybody that was any kind of a bowler, connected with bowler, local bowlers were being called. The 360th pick was Yogi Berra, because Yogi Berra, who was the catcher for the Yankees then, he was also a bowling proprietor. He owned a bowling alley in New Jersey with Phil Rizzuto. So they got some publicity for having Yogi Berra in the draft.
Yogi, but not Phil.
No. No, Phil was too little at that time. But they picked these bowlers, and then they had to sign them, and that was part of the problem because, as I said, the elite bowlers like Don Carter and Whaley and Weber and Lillard and some of these guys, most of them had contracts with locally sponsored teams and with equipment manufacturers, and so they were kind of wary to give up that stability to sign up with this National Bowling League, even though it looked good. They figured, well, we can wait it out. If it succeeds and we still got the name, we can sign up with these guys. And then, of course, the National Bowling League basically said, well, we're going to make our own names. We're going to make our own heroes.
So there was never, based on your research, there was never any discussion about allowing some of these major players the opportunity to play in both of these environments and help sort of rise the tide for all boats, so to speak?
Well, it was a question of scheduling. It was basically a question of scheduling because these guys had their contracts with, as I said, they were like the Budweisers were the most famous team then, sponsored out of St. Louis by Budweiser Beer. And they had a contract to go around, and they go to different bowling alleys in different cities where Budweiser was being sold, and they'd appear in these in exhibitions. Maybe the whole team would be there, maybe one or two guys, maybe just one guy, and that took up a lot of their time. And plus, they'd be back in St. Louis during the week, and they'd be bowling a regular league in St. Louis. So that took up a lot of their time, and that's why they were what they were getting paid for. Like Carter was getting paid, I think it was about $25,000, which in today's money multiply that by 8. But the National Bowling League was saying they were going to have a minimum salary of $10,000, but these guys were so, well, let's show me the money is the phrase, right? So there was really logistically not much way these guys could do it, but the National Bowling League did though sign up some named bowlers though. As after a few months, Steve Nagy was the first named bowler that they sold up. He was a 2-time bowler of the year, and he was the guy that had shot the first 300 game in a film series, and he is also the first bowler featured on the cover of Sports Illustrated, and to this day, the only bowler featured on the cover of Sports Illustrated. So when they signed Steve Nagy to bowl, that showed they were serious.
So that's interesting. So Steve Nagy is sort of as a marquee signing.
Yeah, he was the first named bowler.
Let me ask you this then. So let's back up on the franchises for a second. So you're mentioning sort of this, certainly the strong tie between, say, beer companies and the sport of bowling and to the point of them sponsoring teams. Why, in your estimation, wouldn't, say, a Stroh's or a Budweiser or whomever think about buying one of these franchises and kind of, naming it or shoehorning it in their name into owning a franchise in a city in this fledgling league?
The league wouldn't do it that way. Look at the St. Louis Cardinals, 1954. Gussie Busch of Budweiser bought the St. Louis Cardinals. He wanted to change the name of the stadium, which was Sportsman's Park. He wanted to call it Budweiser Stadium. National League would not let him do that. Okay? That was cheapening their product. Today, of course, we got people, sports facilities sell naming rights all the time. But it wasn't done then. It was considered mixing things up. Of course, Gussie Busch got around that because he changed the name to Busch Stadium, and then he started putting out a beer called Busch Beer. So he kind of got around that one. But no, Stroh's and these companies, they were doing fine the way they were. Why should they risk the money to do this? Again, it was a speculative deal, and a lot of people were going to sit back and wait to see what happened. Because there was also this competition with the professional bowling. Now, the thing with the Professional Bowlers Association, first of all, they were still on a limited schedule, and they were originally was only like a few weeks out of the year, and even by 1962 it was only 13 weeks out of the year that had the big tournaments, and most of those were like later in the week. So bowlers who were signed up with one of the beer teams or somebody else, they'd still have time to bowl in their local league. They'd still have time to do their exhibitions, and they could bowl in the Professional Bowlers tournaments. But if you were with the National Bowling League, you were tied in originally 3 nights a week, and you were traveling around all the time. So there was no way you could fulfill your contract with a equipment manufacturer and bowl in the National Bowling League. They had probably bitten off more they could chew. They were probably too ambitious. Maybe they should have started on a smaller scale.
Okay, so now let me just bluntly ask this question then, and maybe this will be a theme as we sort of go through the rest of the not so long history of this. But explain to me, and more importantly to our audience, the relationship, if there was any, hands-off, hands-on, maybe underhanded, between the Pro Bowlers Association in its infancy and this National Bowling League. Because it seems in retrospect that there was sort of a bit of an antagonism, or maybe the PBA having a bit of a head start, I guess, in terms of popularity of professionalism, almost maybe not wanting this NBL to kind of happen. But from what I read from your writings, it almost seems like the PBA, at least publicly, kind of said, we don't mind it, but I don't know if that feels true or not to me.
It isn't true. That's what they said in public. I mean, they're not going to go bad-mouthing another bowling promotion, but behind the scenes, Eddie Elias and the crew that ran the Professional Bowlers Association was cautioning their bowlers, you don't want to get started in this venture over here. You're going to waste a lot of time. It's not going to make any money. The way to go is here with the Professional Bowlers Association. We have a model that we're using that's based on golf, and bowling was, in those days, was not quite as popular as golf, but it was moving up, starting to rival it. Whereas, let's face it, bowling was never going to rival the Major League Baseball or the football teams or basketball or hockey. Probably wouldn't rival them either. So a lot of bowlers thought the way to go was the PBA model, the individual model, okay? Even though bowling had been traditionally a team sport, okay, 5-man team usually, they've got the idea that if you were going to be a professional, if you're going to make money, the way to do it was the PBA model. And so when the bowlers were kind of warned off with joining the National Bowling League, a lot of them did not take the plunge.
That's very interesting. And look, we do a lot of investigation of things all the way back to the earliest days of baseball even. And certain themes evolve and keep sort of repeating themselves. And it almost reminds me now of what's going on with, obviously in a different realm, lacrosse here in the United States, right? So there's an outdoor lacrosse league called Major League Lacrosse, and don't get me started on the indoor league, but it's a whole different thing. But last year or this last summer, we saw the introduction of a competitive league that's more of a tour kind of thing called Premier League Lacrosse. So it's very interesting, and we get into things like central control versus franchises and those economic models and stuff. But this feels to me like the very root of the birth of professionalism in bowling in this country, where it's almost sort of the battle of the models, right? Sort of the individual model and the tour kind of model, going city to city with some of the game's best stars, and having it being somewhat easily televisable, versus almost an emulation of, say, Major League Baseball, like you mentioned, or maybe even National Football League, where it's civic, teams battling it out sort of in a prideful kind of manner, city versus city, kind of for the pride, if you will, of each metropolitan area. And, I guess at the time it seems like, why not give both a shot? But it just seems that the NBL kind of had so many strikes, no pun, I guess, against it in the beginning, given the PBA's, influence or undue influence in the sport thus far.
Well, one of the things you should think about, and this is something that's in retrospect you can see this with bowling. Bowling is, as I said, it's always been a team sport, usually a 5-man team. But basically, you have 5 individuals shooting and adding their scores up, right? Okay, and it's an individual game, which in team play is gathered 5 men together. The other major sports like football or baseball or hockey or basketball are really not individual sports. You don't have a baseball game where one guy gets up and hits, and then another guy gets up, and then another guy gets up separately, or so on. They work together as a unit. Those major team sports work together as a unit. Bowling was basically, when you look at it in its details, is an individual sport where you just add the scores of 5 bowlers together, or 3 or 6, or however many you'd have on a team. 5 was the usual number they came up with. So in that sense, the individual model of the Professional Bowlers Association was bound to succeed, because that's basically what bowling is, an individual sport which had been grafted on, which had been played as a team sport.
Well, so that's interesting. So, all right, so the draft is done. You've got players stocked. You've got some teams kind of announced. Maybe you could give our audience a sense of sort of how these franchises were going to, if you will, go to market in terms of the places that these matches would be held. It seems like these cities all had sort of different approaches to that.
Yeah, in Kansas City, they had an old theater downtown that they converted into bowling alley. And in some of the other places, they had like an existing bowling alley that they tacked an arena on for the matches, where they had like 4 lanes there with seating. The most ambitious idea was in New York City, where they took Grand Central Station, which is right in the heart of Manhattan, 42nd Street. There was a proposal that was actually given serious consideration of putting bowling lanes, dropping it down in the grand waiting room, and roofing that over and having bowling lanes, and in fact on a mezzanine over there, and putting the arena in there. And there was actually serious discussion about that, but then the preservationists said, this is ridiculous. So that never went very far, and they wound up shooting in New Jersey instead. But in all these cities, they did have purpose-built arenas. Either it was an arena by itself, or as I said, it was something that was converted like a movie theater, or it was tacked on to an existing bowling center. As a matter of fact, that's how they wound up with 8 teams instead of 12, because they had signed up 12 teams, and 4 of them could not meet their deadlines for providing an arena, so they were just axed. And when the league finally got ready to get going, they only had 8 teams.
Yeah, that's interesting, because you look at some of these photos, and there are not a whole lot of them out there, at least the ones I could tell. Maybe you've got another source that we could talk about after our conversation. But there were, some you mentioned like Kansas City and Omaha. They were actually in theaters, actually performing theaters, where they literally just built the lanes on the stages of those and sort of created an environment almost like a stage show, if you will. And versus, say, Dallas, like the Bronco Bowl, which we'll get into in a second, which is the Lamar Hunt involvement, which is really sort of a larger sort of commercial bowling centers with multiple lanes and part of sort of the, come on down and family play games and your local leagues and that kind of stuff, where they would just maybe, I guess, curtain off the other lanes and sort of just focus on 4 lanes or so to make it, that sort of be the stage for the games. But it also seems like, too, that there were just others, like you mentioned the New York situation, but others who, and maybe I think it seems like Leonard Homel wanted to kind of be part of this sort of group of folks that just want to create or build their own sort of purposeful or purpose-built little mini arenas specifically for this league.
Yeah, that's what they did. Every place had its own little arena that was just used for the National Bowling League only. Even these large-scale bowling centers had these little annexes. As a matter of fact, the one relic that's still standing is Thunderbolt in Allen Park, a Detroit suburb. They have 78 or 80 lanes wherever they got there, and they still have the little National Bowling League arena next to it, like 4 or 6 lanes or whatever it is. So that was the type of model that most of them were going to go with. Okay, a regular existing bowling center, and you would have this purpose-built arena next to it, and the bowling from the open play and the leagues from the regular bowling center were going to help finance the construction cost.
Very interesting. And for you New York, New Jersey metropolitan area folks like myself, having grown up there's the trivia question, is where in the fact that the Grand Central bowling idea fell through, do we know where in New Jersey the New York franchise was actually located? Do you know that off the top of your head, Doc?
Mattawan, New Jersey. There was a picture in the book, in my book, The Bowling Chronicles, of a match at the, I think they call it Gladiator Arena, which was the name of the team, New York Gladiators. It was in Mattawan, New Jersey, and you can see it's late in the season, and you look in the stands, and there's, 10 people sitting around watching the match. I mean, there's probably more guys down on the lanes bowling.
All right, what's this? Mack Weldon. Mack Weldon, of course. Mack Weldon is the premium men's essentials brand that believes in smart design and premium fabrics. And, they go out on a limb, Mack Weldon does. They claim that their stuff is better than whatever you're wearing right now. That's pretty bold, and them's fighting words for sure. But you know what? In the case of Mack Weldon, it's absolutely true. Trust me, because I've been wearing a whole bunch of Mack Weldon stuff over the last number of months, and I can vouch for just about all of it, frankly. And they're designed, frankly, the Mack Weldon offerings to be the most comfortable underwear, undershirts, socks, shirts, hoodies, sweatpants, you name it. Anything in the realm of basics, Mack Weldon has got you covered. And not only does Mack Weldon's underwear and socks and shirts look good, they perform well, too. They're great for working out or going to work or going out on dates, just everyday life. I highly recommend them, and they're easy to purchase, and it's a great way to sort of get all your basics covered in one fell swoop with our friends at Mack Weldon. Of course, we got you covered with a discount for you. Make sure you use the promo code GOODSEATS when you go to MackWeldon.com, and you're going to get 20% off your first order. You bet, 20% off your first order just visiting MackWeldon.com and entering the promo code Good Seats. Now, I've, beyond a couple of the shirts, and they've got a couple of great thermal long sleeve shirts. I love those, especially as the months are getting colder now. But I will tell you, probably the most underrated offerings in their collection of fine garb are socks. They've got a tremendous selection and array of different forms of socks. There's some really great dress and casual looking socks. They're high quality too. I've been wearing them, like I said, for a couple of months now. They stay high in your calf. They don't lose their shape. And of course, they're made with, along with a lot of the clothing that they've got at Mack Weldon, from their proprietary antimicrobial technology, which basically means they help eliminate odor. Doesn't mean you can't wash them. You got to wash them, of course, guys. But in terms of their staying power, shall we say, it's amazing technology that keeps your clothes as fresh and clean as they can be as they go on in their lifetimes. And again, we've got 20% off all of your purchases from your first order at MackWeldon.com when you enter the promo code GOODSEATS. So check it out. Again, MackWeldon.com, promo code GOODSEATS. And now, back to our conversation. And it's interesting in these theaters, right? So I think the New York team also played in a theater in Totowa, New Jersey. I think Kansas City played in these, I guess they were famous theaters at the time. The Midland Theater in Omaha was called the Paramount.
Yeah, the Kansas City thing, that they did there's a kinescope out of that the league had filmed to promote it, and where they're bowling in this theater in Kansas City, and it's a palace. It's a palace from the 1920s. And when they bowled there, they even had the mayor came out and he threw out the first ball and everything. So they were very excited.
So I got to think that these plans would have at least been an enticing component to the pitch to television networks, right? Because it's clear that there was a lot of thought being given to how to present both live as well as on television. Can you talk about this kinescope? Because I wonder where this is. I read about it in your writings. I guess there was a promo reel or film that was kind of created to maybe, I guess, shop around to the networks as this being television worthy, no?
Oh, they have it down at the National Bowling Museum in Texas. They have a copy of it. I've seen it. Maybe it's up on YouTube. Who knows? But I've seen this kinescope. It's an exhibition match. They had the Kansas City team, which I think was called the Stars. I can't remember. And they were bowling against a makeup team of bowlers from the other teams. And they bowled I think they bowled a 2-game match because originally they were going to bowl 3-game matches, but kind of dragging, so they went into 2-game matches. But yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting.
So, okay, but the television thing never sort of happened, and they didn't let that sort of get in the way of getting the league actually started in 1961. Do you have any insight into how well or how close the idea of getting televised games for the beginning of the season in 61 was, or were they just resigned to the fact and they were just sort of more focused on just operationally getting the games and the matches up and running?
Well, I get the feeling that they were never even close to the TV contract, because they talked very bravely, but I think they figured, well, since we couldn't get the TV contract, we're willing to pay them enough for what they wanted. They would just figure, well, we're going to get a big gate and it'll look impressive, and then the TV companies will come to us. But it didn't work out that way. The attendance was very poor. I mean, I think Detroit, they had the best attendance, and they maybe averaged around 1,500 people for a while. And then one of the cities, Fresno, wound up as one of the cities. They were averaging like 400 people. And this was, at the beginning of the season when there was a lot of interest in it. And of course, as I said, by the end of the season, everything's kind of slacking off. And as you said, you got these situations like where that bowling alley looks deserted. The arena, there's hardly anybody over there.
So let's talk about the teams then. So you mentioned some of the cities, but give me it doesn't seem like, again, in retrospect, and I don't know, and I haven't, dug through all the newspapers at the time and stuff, but, it's my understanding that, bowling was a fairly well covered sport in sports sections of newspapers. I got to think that there would have been some promotion there. And what about marketing and advertising of these teams, right? Was there any money kind of out there to kind of promote the fact that, frankly, you got to come see this because it's not going to be on television, or I find it hard to believe that there wasn't any sort of marketing kind of stuff aside from the occasional Sports Illustrated article or column in a newspaper, right? That, to attract or to entice people to come.
Well, I don't know if it was a question of they hired the wrong people to promote it or what, but they didn't get the word out. I mean, okay, you had 8 teams. They finally started Dallas and Detroit and Fort Worth and Fresno, Kansas City and L.A. and New York, Omaha and San Antonio and the Twin City Skippers. That's not 8, it's 10 rather. They had 10 teams they start with. But they tried to promote it, but it didn't pick up. They didn't pick up. The newspapers would send somebody to it, and the news reporters would go there, and they get bored most of the time. Give you an example of this. Dick Charles, the commissioner, when he'd go into the city, okay, he'd land at the airport, he'd get in the cab, and right away he'd ask the cab driver, hey, how's the San Antonio Cavaliers doing, the local bowling team, or how the Los Angeles Toros doing? And he'd get in the cab, and the cabbie wouldn't know what he was talking about. And this was like the local bowling team. I think I read someplace like it took him like months before somebody realized there was a bowling team in town. So the local newspapers, did not promote it as well too, because after a while, you go to a match and you see there are only a handful of people over there, and you think, well, why should we promote this? There's not public interest in it. Well, we got other sports we can write about, or maybe we can write about the Professional Bowlers Association, which is drawing people as well.
Well, it seems to me that the Pro Bowlers Association, though, kind of also maybe kind of crossed them off at the pass, right, in terms of getting a television contract, right? I know the Pro Bowlers Tour at ABC, that was sort of, I don't know if it was around at that time. I don't know when that actually got launched, but it almost feels to me like whether through luck or by cunning, the PBA kind of got the TV sort of situation before or instead of the NBL.
Well, look at it this way. The PBA, you just have an hour and a half broadcast, and you have it in a one location. You go from city to city to city, and that's it. The National Bowling League, you're jumping all over the country. You're going from L.A., you're going to New York and places like that. And these matches, who knows how long the match is going to be. Even when they cut it to 2 games, you might be there for an hour and a half. You might be there for 2 hours. The Professional Bowling Association, quick, individual matches, easy to follow, and so on. So the model of team bowling was not agreeable, was not to the networks. It was much easier to sign something, much simpler to sign something, a package like the PBA, than it was to deal with this whole league concept.
All right, so we're talking October-ish of 1961, when they sort of things got going, actual matches and competitive play. What were the organizers, what did they have in mind in terms of how the format for this would work? Because I do understand that there were some points, uniqueness to it, as well as even this a couple of extra wrinkles in terms of how to sort of add some drama to these competitive matches.
Yeah, well, as I said, originally they started with, they're going to have 5-man teams and 3-game matches, which has been the tradition. Well, that dragged, so they cut it to 2 men. And one of the things they had was they had a point system, where besides adding up the bowler scores at the end of the night, you'd have the first bowler while he was bowling in the team play would be matched against the first bowler and the other team, and the second bowler against the second team. And if the guy like on Detroit shoots 210, and the guy in his opponent San Antonio shoots 205, then the Detroit guy gets 1 point, right? Besides his 200 and 210, and those extra points would go into a total, and you get points for if the whole team won the game, they get so many points, and plus you get so many points for these individual matches, and you get so many points for the individual series, and plus the guy who shot the high game of the night, he get points. And it would be kind of confusing, but at the end of the night, whichever team had more points, they would get a W, okay, in the league standings. They would get a one loss. So it was basically like Major League Baseball was one loss.
So they were getting rewarded for individual achievements during these matches, as well as sort of team competition type
in competition.
Okay.
And as I said, it was kind of difficult for a lot of people to follow this. The funny thing is now a lot of leagues have this system. The league I bowl in has this system till we get extra points. And I'm bowling like fifth. The guy that's bowling fifth opposite me, I beat him, I get an extra point. You know, we've adopted kind of that system. The one thing they did not adopt that the league was actually kind of popular with the spectators was what they call a wild card. In other words, the teams always carried more than 5 bowlers. They carried like 7, 8 bowlers, maybe 9 or 10 at the beginning of the season when they had money. And say a bowler would go out and he'd leave a split, okay, like something like the, let's say the 4, 7, 10. Well, a bowler would, anybody who's a bowler would know that a left-hander has a little bit of an advantage on this compared to a right-hander, depending on the way the ball curves. So what you might do is you call in a wild card. You have a lefty sitting on the bench, and you call this guy in, and he would actually try to take a shot at the spare, and he might have a marginally better chance of picking up the spare than regular right-handed bowler. And when this guy came off the bench cold and he threw his one ball and he picked up the split, I said, my God, the house would go wild, because it was a very dramatic way of doing things. So that was the one thing that was very popular with the fans. Even though it didn't always turn out that way, you didn't always have the guy convert the split or whatever he needed to do. But when he did, wow, that was something.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So it's almost like having a ringer, if you will.
Yeah, basically.
We have a handful of opportunities to use sort of a player like that. So, I mean, that feels to me like kind of maybe where the league could have had a bit of an advantage and some, I wouldn't call it gimmickry, but the idea is that, it at least adds a little bit of sort of, competitive spice to things that might ordinarily just seem like pretty rote when it's 5 versus 5.
Well, one of the other things they tried to do is they tried to encourage the fans to get involved in this, because like normally when people go watch a bowling match, they'd be quiet, and if somebody threw a strike or picked up a rail or something, they'd clap, and then they'd be quiet again. Well, what the league tried to do is encourage the fans to try to make some noise and carry on like you're at a baseball game or something like that. Well, you're in a little arena over here, and that you can hear what everybody's saying, and a lot of the bowlers didn't like that. I mean, you got Ed Lubansky was working a bunch of strikes, going for a 300 game, and it was getting noise in the back, and he refused to stop until the guys were quieted down. And there was another case, Carmen Selvino, who's still alive now. He's still around, and about 85 years old. He's very, very exuberant bowler, very demonstrative bowler. Guy in the stands started getting on him, and Mrs. Selvino was over there, and he was calling Selvino nasty names, and he happened to be sitting next to Mrs. Selvino. So Carmen finally had enough, and Carmen climbed into the stands to confront this guy. Okay, and they kind of had to pull him away and so on. So that was in some sense that would backfire, this idea of trying to get people involved in things. But that was they had to do something because they were losing fans, so they tried that. Then they try other things like that. They had like halftime shows. I think in Dallas they had a bowling chimp that came on, but they would try anything to try and get fans. They cut ticket prices. Nothing seemed to work after a while.
Yeah, all these things sound like they'd be perfect for television, ironically.
Yeah, but again, TV was kind of wary about this model because when the league started, they were going to bowl 5 nights a week, okay, because they're going to be moving all over the place to do this. Well, after a while, they saw this wasn't working, so at the half season, teams were dropping out. They got down to only 6 teams. Even Leonard Homel's team had a fold. So they were by mid-season, by January, they're down to 6 teams. And they had to cut back. They finally cut back to 2 days they were going to bowl. They were going to bowl like a doubleheader, I think it was on Sunday, and then they were going to bowl Monday just to save money. So things weren't working out.
All right, so of all those 10 or 8 or whatever the number of teams were, because this clearly was a moving target as the season kind of sort of rolled on again, so to speak. Understand where this question is coming from. Were there any teams that were, shall we say, more successful than others, despite the truncated nature of this league and this season? Did some kind of do it right or were onto something? And if things had gone on, maybe could have like made a go out of it versus others which were maybe just complete farces from the beginning?
Yeah, probably Detroit. I don't know if they made money, but they probably lost less money than the rest of the league because Detroit, again, was a bowling hotbed. As a matter of fact, was probably with Chicago and St. Louis not being in the league, it was probably the bowling city that was in the National Bowling League. And as a matter of fact, they wound up winning the championship. When they got halfway through the season and teams were dropping out, the league had a meeting and they decided, okay, Detroit's got the best record. They won the first half. And now we'll have a second half, and whoever wins the second half, then they'll bowl Detroit for the World Series title. So, yeah, Detroit probably had the best shot, either made the most money or lost the least.
So this is the Detroit Thunderbirds, named after, I guess, right, this complex that they were part of that you say is still standing. And is there any reference to it? Is there a plaque or anything that NBL bowling was played here, or is it completely forgotten?
Well, I don't think it's forgotten. I don't think it's totally forgotten. I've been in the place. I've bowled in the place. Every once in a while, they hold something in the arena, which is like this little annex next to it. They should have it really on a plaque there, but I really don't know if they do. I have to look next time I get to Detroit.
All right, so you are Detroit listeners, if you're not already shouting at your devices, correcting me on this piece of ignorance that I've thrown out there. It'd be very interesting to know. But so let's talk through sort of the season now. So you hinted at it, but just to clarify for the audience, right? So there were 4 of these original 10 teams that folded kind of in the mid-season, right? So the Packers of Omaha, the Los Angeles Toros, which you alluded to was actually owned by, the guy behind this whole league in the first place, which is sad and sadly ironic, right? The Stars of Kansas City and the San Antonio Cavaliers, who I think never even had a home match, right? Because they couldn't find an arena to play.
No, they had this retired Air Force general, Tony Linderman, who I mentioned before, was the captain of the team. He told me about this. This guy was supposed to build the arena, and he didn't have the money for it. And by this time, they were getting close to the start of the season, so they couldn't kick this team out. So they made him a road team, and they would travel around to different other cities. Linderman himself, he moved to Dallas, and he lived in Dallas, and they would go and they'd be like a swing team. They would bowl in all these other cities, and that didn't last very long. And they eventually had to drop out of the league too.
So that second half though then was of the remaining teams, and then the winner of that second half, which was Twin Cities.
Right, the Twin Cities Skippers.
Who the Clippers would then play?
Skippers.
I'm sorry, the Skippers. I apologize. Hey, look, it was only out there for a couple of months. You got to give me a break here. So, all right. So what was the method or the mechanism that the champion was to be determined as they stumbled through the rest of this league? So, Twin Cities versus Detroit in what was it? A one-game thing, or was it a series, or what?
No, it was just like a original. It was just going to be a match against the teams over here. And first of all, they weren't even going to make it home and home because of the belt tightening had gone down. By this time, Dick Charles, the commissioner, he'd been fired because they couldn't afford to pay his salary, and they did have a lawyer. The league's lawyer, he had to double up on the jobs to save money. And they finally were faced off against the Twin Cities Skippers and the Thunderbirds May 5th and 6th, and they were going to bowl the best of, it was going to be a best of 5-game series. But Detroit swept it, in 3 games. They won the first 3 2-game matches, and that was it. They became the 61-62 NBL champions. And local TV station filmed it, the championship match, and nothing seemed to go right because they didn't even get much newspaper publicity because the Detroit newspapers were on strike that week. But the bowlers split their purse. I think the winners got $2,500 to split. The losers got $1,500. And then the league said, well, we're going to be back for a second season. Don't worry about it. But by July, they just announced that it was over.
All right, a couple of things to unpack there. So it speaks to some of the bad luck, I guess, in terms of promotion and stuff. So you're hinting that in Detroit, but I guess in a couple of other cities too, right? There was a newspaper writers' strike. Yeah,
in Detroit there was. And as I said, normally even when there wasn't a strike, the local papers after a while weren't even that interested in it.
Yeah, but that's interesting because arguably the only real sort of media source of interest, right, was going to be in this sort of newspaper kind of format, and even that was lacking in Detroit, which is, ready to win the title perhaps. So how much? So that series, the NBL World Series, right, which is in May in Michigan, it wasn't too long between that and I guess it was July 9th, 1962, where the acting commissioner at the time basically said, we're done. The league is over. And I guess a lot of people in the bowling community kind of already sort of surmised that was going to be the case. But was there any particular event or any other sort of issue that sort of popped up? I mean, you'd think that it would have at least given them some time to recalibrate, rethink, perhaps push one more time on the television front. What other things were happening? Was the PBA just really sort of...
They tried to get the TV contract. They made one final pitch for the TV contract. TV wasn't interested, so that was it. The guys weren't going to continue. They were bleeding money all over the place. They weren't going to stay and continue to lose more money, so they just quit. They just gave up the ghost. And most of them lost... Well, everybody lost money. As I said, Detroit probably lost the least. But maybe they could have amortized that with the open play from the regular 84 lanes or whatever they got over there in the regular bowling alley.
So, but to take any sort of lessons from this, right? It wasn't sort of an indictment of the sport of bowling, right? It was just that this was a format and, frankly, situational issues that kind of, was not sort of the best environment for presentation because the PBA seemed to be chugging along quite nicely and moving to the next level.
Oh, yeah, the PBA did very well. The PBA Tour wound up being on the network for 30-something years on ABC on Saturday afternoon, and would outdraw the golf tournaments and a lot of the other sports at the time. So bowling was still very popular into the 1960s, and for many years after, competitive bowling was very popular. It seemed like it was a bad model and a bunch of bad luck, and probably bad execution by some of the people who were in charge of this. Didn't know what they were doing, made some mistakes, whatever. It's easy, hindsight is 20/20, as they say, but who knows at the time what the decisions they made probably seemed good to them.
Any evidence that players who chose to play in the NBL were given maybe a cold shoulder by the PBA once they decided they were going to, end that, or it was ended for them and they went back and they wanted to be in the PBA, or did the PBA sort of welcome with open arms?
No, they were glad to be back. I had a friend of mine, Maury Oppenheim, who's, I believe he's still alive in Chicago. He was on one of these teams in the National Bowling League, and I think he was on the LA team, I can't remember, but at the middle of the season when they were short money, they cut him loose. Okay, and he comes back to Chicago. He's a young guy in his 20s, and he goes over to Cleveland. He gets in a bowling tournament in Cleveland. He almost won the PBA tournament in Cleveland. He finished second, so it was like a Cinderella story on his part. So no, they were welcome back in PBA because after all, they were still bowlers. And Steve Nagy, who was one of the giants of the National Bowling League, everybody loved Steve Nagy. So when the league folded, Steve Nagy comes back to the PBA. Welcome back, Steve. Sorry it didn't work. As a matter of fact, the PBA now, Nagy was so loved. After he died, the PBA has an award they give every year to the nicest guy in the tour, basically, and they call him the Steve Nagy Award. It's like a DeRocher rebuttal award that a nice guy can finish first. So these guys were welcome back. The guy said, no hard feelings. You made a bad choice, and we're sorry you guys lost money, but you had fun while you did it. Well, no, the bowlers didn't lose money, but you had fun at least. So now go back to the PBA.
Well, all right. So let's round the corner on this. So, given that the PBA and the Pro Bowlers Tour and ABC for many years, Chris Schenkel and legendary sort of Saturday and Sunday afternoon presentations, that sort of went on through, I guess, sort of uninterrupted, I guess, through the 70s even.
Oh, into the 90s, actually.
Right. And then obviously, and a couple of different ownerships of the PBA and stuff. And it seems like Fox now is even going to give it another injection, I guess, of promotional spin, if you will, to kind of even, gussy it up even further. But I'm wondering, given all the relative success of the PBA over the years, the Pro Bowlers Tour over the years, and television, and maybe I'm just missing something, but why hasn't there been maybe another attempt at sort of a league-based kind of format or something other than the way it's currently presented, which seems to be pretty straightforward and almost very similar, I guess, to the earliest days of the late 50s, early 60s, in this sort of staggered, laddered format. From a team perspective or some other way to present, I guess, a competitive, maybe team-based, maybe city-based kind of way to do competitive bowling, or were people just so burnt by this experience that nobody wants to even give it a try again, especially given, by the way, a gigantic television environment with lots of niche channels and cable networks and, that could probably support this on a profitable basis.
Well, the PBA has experimented with team play in various small environments, but it's still individual bowling seems to be the way that where the sport seems to be going the last several years, and that's what people are identifying with. And even in recreational bowling is now more overtaken league bowling. League bowling has been dying out gradually over the years. So, who knows what the future of the sport will be? I mean, if we had a crystal ball that worked, we could figure it out, I suppose. But I don't know. And the leaders of the bowling industry, they don't know either. They're operating blind as best they can, and I guess we see what happens.
Yeah, that's interesting because if you look for a sort of an analogy, I guess, or a similarity, I look at, say, World Team Tennis in 1974, 1975, right? There's another sport that, frankly, around the same time, and interestingly, a guy named Lamar Hunt in that story, because the World Tennis Association, which he was behind, was almost battling, again, very similar, I guess, sort of from an individual player perspective versus this sort of team concept where Billie Jean King and her husband at the time, Larry King, not that Larry King, and some others were sort of trying to create a team concept, right down to what you just described, fans getting involved and hooting and hollering and making it fun versus sort of the quiet kind of thing. And obviously it exists today in a much sort of more diluted form, World Team Tennis does. But for a couple of years in the 70s, that was almost a carbon copy, albeit in a different sport, of this concept that the NBL was kind of trying to get off the ground.
Well, you do have people tell you, like, golf, for instance. You do have the pro golfers, which is basically an individual sport. But the golfers, when they're on the Ryder Cup team and they're representing the United States or they're representing Europe, they will tell you, most of the golfers, that it's a completely different game. The idea of you working as a team, okay? So team play, that camaraderie is very powerful in sports if you can get things together in a team. And the bowlers that bowled in team events, that bowl as a team and also bowl in the National Bowling League, almost all of them will tell you that they preferred bowling in the team format as opposed to the PBA singles format. Not everyone. Now, there are a few bowlers I can think of who I won't mention that I talked to, and they said, no, the PBA is much better. The National Bowling League was a pipe dream. But most bowlers who participated in the team event and the National Bowling League as a team, they like that type of play better because, as I said, there was the camaraderie of it, the social interaction with the other guys.
Yeah, and I guess, and I alluded to it earlier. So I just, I wonder. We'll see what Fox has up its sleeve in terms of its presentation. I mean, I know Rob Stone, for example, who covered a lot of the matches during his ESPN days, is sort of he calls himself a ham bone purist, but he's sort of a younger generation of folks trying to sort of inject more excitement and energy, and certainly the personalities are certainly part of it, right? You want to have it stop short, I guess, of pro wrestling, I guess, in terms of, the integrity, I guess, of the play and the sport. But I do see, there is sort of a renaissance, I guess, of some of these pro sports that is sort of I guess you could call it a hybrid between, that of the individual sort of approach and competition and that of teams. This sort of like touring teams thing, right? Like the Big Three in basketball or the Premier League Lacrosse experiment, which will be going into its second season next year, right? Where these teams they're kind of manufactured. They're not domiciled around geographies, but they are sort of teams that literally go city to city week after week and compete against each other in a more team-based competitive format versus straight individuals. I wonder if that might be a mechanism of interest for the PBA to, I don't know, evolve from just the pure head-to-head individuals, or maybe I'm just sort of, pipe dreaming here.
No, that's what they're thinking about doing. I don't know what's going to be the final form about that. You'd be better off talking to somebody in the PBA about that. But the idea of, as you said, of a hybrid of taking individual sports, which is basically what team bowling is. It's a hybrid of an individual sport, putting on a team model. Yeah, that would seem to be the way to go because the idea would be it would appeal to promoting team bowling by the regular everyday bowlers like you had. Like I cited the statistic in 1960, you had 1 out of every 17 adults in the country were in some kind of a league. Okay, and of course we've lost that. And if they could get back to that idea of team bowling, that would be good. I mean, what was the basic book that was written 20 years ago called Bowling Alone, about how America's social capital is kind of dissipated through that. People aren't connecting in society the way they used to. But I think that it's got a possibility to do that. I would hope it would be, but I guess again we have to see how things work out and how it's promoted.
Very, very interesting. All right, so let me ask you this one last question because I think it's been a theme in our chat, and that is bowling and television. They seem to have gone hand in hand since the earliest days of professionalism, and we've kind of walked through sort of how one sort of format made sense and how one maybe was not attractive. So, what is your sense of that relationship going forward? I mean, I know the PBA has gone through a couple of different, or the Pro Bowlers Tour has gone through a couple of different owners over the last number of years, and it's gone through various television contracts and stuff. But it's undeniable that there's an attraction there, and there's an affiliation, right, between the average Joe, if you will, and playing the sport. I mean, I grew up watching things like Bowling for Dollars, which is sort of a local franchise, or I'm fascinated, for example, by old episodes from the 1970s of Celebrity Bowling, which is out there floating around in syndication with, Don Adams versus Don Rickles, in a match, right next door to Don Amici and and Barbara Feldon. I mean, it's just fascinating stuff. But bowling continues to endure. What are your thoughts about the current state of bowling as it is played professionally and specifically television, given your knowledge of the sport?
Well, I think bowling will always endure, and unfortunately, I think they have to continue to come up with more and better ideas of promoting it. If they come in with, as you said, a limited team concept for bowling for a few weeks of that, or if they can come up with like a best, the equivalent of a golf format where you have one guy throw the first ball and the other guy picks up the spare. I think you call it Scotch doubles, I believe. So if they can come up with any kind of more interesting formats to just get people watching it, I think that will help very much, because you're always going to have a core of dedicated bowlers who will watch it and will watch how the bowlers are playing the lanes, what kind of ball they're using, and so on like that. But you have to get the general public involved in this, and you have to get the kids involved in this. And they've been trying for years to get the kids involved in this, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But there's so much else competition for people's attention now. It is difficult, but there will always be a niche for it, and it's a question of maybe you need to do baby steps instead of shooting too big, shooting too high, instead of taking giant leaps. That was probably one of the reasons the National Bowling League failed, because they tried to do it all at once. If bowling is going to succeed, they have to do it with baby steps. You're not going to get back to where you were in the 1960s and 1970s overnight. You're going to have to do it slowly and build on it and get that interest back in the sport. And I really hope it happens, because I've been bowling for 60-something years. I've been writing about it for 30-something years. I love the sport. I love the people in it, because they're the most wonderful people in the world. And this sport will not die. We're not going to let it die, and it's going to triumph.
Yeah, and I guess it's personalities too, right? It seems to sort of wax and wane, and obviously, there are certainly legendary names that I even remember from watching some of the old pro bowlers tours and stuff. But I guess the Don Carters of the world, right? I mean, these are names that people actually do remember, because they were stars in their own right and making some big bucks.
Yeah, when light beer was being promoted, light beer used to have all these guys on retired sports stars doing commercials, like Mark Throneberry and other people like that, Bubba Smith. Who was the one bowler they had? They have Don Carter. He would do the commercials. Okay, the Bud Light commercial, they had Rodney Dangerfield out there throwing a ball, for this thing. So people knew bowlers. People knew, you say Don Carter, everybody knew who Don Carter was in the 1960s. Even in the 1980s, when he hadn't bowled professionally in 10, 20, 30 years. He'd been past his peak. You knew who Don Carter was, because they got that publicity back in his heydays in the 50s. So Dick Weber, his teammate. But, yeah.
Okay. Well, Dr. Jake, here's your chance to promote. What's the book that you have out there that people can kind of get a good taste of the rich and deep history of bowling in this country?
Okay, it's called The Bowling Chronicles. It's by me, J.R. Schmidt, and it's a collection of 90 of the stories I've done for Bowler's Journal over the last 30-something years, and including is a very long story on the National Bowling League, including that picture of the Gladiator Arena in Tonawanda, New Jersey, with a dozen people in the stands watching the bowlers, and many other great pictures as well.
That's fantastic. Well, this has been a treat for me, because I love all, like I said, pro sports teams and leagues and all that kind of stuff, and this silly little show over the last couple of years has started to really resonate, and it does wax and wane. I think, some people are football fans or baseball fans or a particular team from their childhood and stuff, but we love to go deep into some of the, dare I say, obscure, but similarly fascinating stories of other sports that, sort of defy maybe modern logic, but when looked upon in context, make a ton of sense. And you just, you wonder about sort of the stories and the situations and the and all of that sort of behind it. And this is absolutely one of them. And God, it's been tough to find a lot of information about this thing called the National Bowling League. And I'm honored to have been able to talk to who I think, frankly, is probably the national, if not the world's, deepest expert in the sport of bowling. And that's Dr. Jake. I appreciate your time very much. It's been awesome.
Well, thank you for the kind words, and thank you for helping to promote bowling, because it is a great sport. competitively and also recreationally, and we are not going to lose this sport. We're going to go out and bowl some games today after listening to me. Go ahead.
All right, there it is, man. Yeah, this is almost like an alternate history, perhaps, of the sport of bowling. You know, had it not been for the Pro Bowlers Tour, this National Bowling League might have been the way we would enjoy the professional ranks of bowling in this country. But alas, for all the reasons we talked about with Dr. Jake, it was not to be. But boy, that was pretty interesting stuff. And, you know, next time you're up in Allen Park, Michigan, in the suburbs of Detroit, check out the Thunder Bowl. It's still there. And I wonder if there's a plaque or any other kind of commemorative item there that reminisces or remembers the old Detroit Thunderbirds of the National Bowling League. I challenge our listeners up in Michigan to let us know, maybe send us a photo or two and just let us know what the situation is up there in terms of the memories of the Thunderbirds and the old National Bowling League. And Dr. Jake is just a wealth of information about the sport of bowling. And I don't consider myself an aficionado, but I learned a lot, and I'm intrigued to learn more, frankly. And Dr. Jake's book is called The Bowling Chronicles, The Collected Writings of Dr. Jake. It was published in late 2016. Dr. Jake was has been for many years the sort of in-house writer and historian for Bowlers Journal International. Sorry, I can't say that 3 times fast. And this is the collected writings of Dr. Jake. He's got a couple of other books out there too, but this is probably the best and most accessible tome. And of course, there are a couple of chapters devoted to the NBL in that as well. And of course, you can find the Bowling Chronicles wherever good books are found. But of course, you can find it on our website too at goodseatsstillavailable.com. Just search up this episode. What number is it? I think it's number 141 with Dr. Jake, and you'll find a link and some photos, of course, to the book. And you'll be whisked away to Amazon to click and purchase a copy for yourself. We, of course, get a couple of nickels and dimes of love. We appreciate that. That helps our show keep going and pay some bills. We appreciate that. And I'm sure Dr. Jake will appreciate that as well. And while you're there at goodseatsstillavailable.com, why don't you tool around and see all the other great stuff we've got for you. And, for example, the other 140 episodes that we've done so far and the more to come. They're all there for you. You can download them or stream them, do whatever you'd like, but send them as emails to your friends. Whatever you want to do, they're all there at goodseatsstillavailable.com, as are our social media feeds. You can find the links to those, or just go directly, if you like, to your favorite platforms and follow us. Why don't you? On Twitter, you'll find us at Good Seats Still. On Instagram, you'll find us at Good Seats Still Available. On Facebook, you'll find us. There's a little web page devoted to us there. You just search up there and find us there. I don't know exactly how you find it, but you'll find it. Look, you want to send us some email? You can do that directly if you'd like. Send a note to hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com. If you forget that, just go to the website and you find the link and you click on, and it'll send a little form there to us in email form. And of course, you can also subscribe to our weekly newsletter there at goodseatsstillavailable.com. Just search up there and find it, and send us a little note, and we'll gladly add you to our weekly newsletter, and you'll have a couple of days advance notice as to what new episode awaits you before the hoi polloi, the average Joe on the street there. All right, one last thing we want to say thank you, as we always do each week, to our pal Jerry Payne, the good doctor, our second doctor to be feted on this week's episode. He, of course, the guy in charge of putting all of our collective pieces together and doing all of our editing chores, and we appreciate it as always. And you can find out more about Jerry and his team at Podfly Productions by going to podfly.net. All right, we are just about done, but I just want to harken back again. As we mentioned earlier, a lot of the intersection between bowling and television has been synonymous, frankly, with the medium and the sport over many decades. And if you were alive during the 1970s, you may remember a little show called Celebrity Bowling. And we're going to leave you now with that theme song from that show. And I tell you, go onto YouTube, you'll find you will lose hours of your life by finding some of these old episodes of Celebrity Bowling. 4 celebrities each show, and none of them related to each other whatsoever. It defies description. It's hilarious to watch. Enjoy it, why don't you? But here's the theme song from that hip Celebrity Bowling show, and it's actually titled King Richard's, it's called Everybody Loves My Baby. That's the theme song. And it's by a group called King Richard's Flugel Knights. No joke. And it's called Everybody Loves My Baby. And again, also known as the theme song from Celebrity Bowling. Until next week, we bid you fond adieu. We'll see you.